Please welcome Scott Ritter. Thanks very much again, Scott, for joining us. Let's start with the counteroffensive. Has it paused? Has it lulled? Has it stopped? Has it been defeated? Will it restart? And if the answer is that it has stopped, kindly explain why you think so.
Well, first of all, I think it's clear it's been defeated. It was defeated the moment it was conceived. It was defeated the moment they crossed the line of departure. This counteroffensive never had a chance of succeeding. It's fundamentally flawed in terms of its, the goals and objectives. Ukraine lacks sufficient training, lacks the resources, lacks the sustainability to achieve the ambitious program it set out for itself, let alone even denting the Russian lines. They're not going to breach the Russian lines. So this counteroffensive has failed. Now, when will Ukraine recognize this failure? To answer that, I think we have to reflect on the fact that this is not a military operation. Had it been a military operation, it never would have been initiated because it has no chance of success. This is a political operation, which means that the goals and objectives of sacrificing billions of dollars of equipment and tens of thousands of lives are linked to creating a perception of Ukraine's viability in time for a NATO summit that convenes in Vilnius on July 11th. And right now, the Ukrainians understand that they continue along the path that they initiated. There's no chance of this whatsoever. So I believe that there is an operational pause, a lull, while they lick their wounds, reconsolidate, and seek to find something that is achievable so that they can tell NATO, look, all that money you gave us, look what we accomplished. I don't think they're going to succeed, but I think that's the direction that they're heading right now.
President Putin said that it had paused or lulled, I forget which word he used, but that the offensive capabilities of Ukraine were not yet exhausted. He seems to have a higher opinion of their military potential than you, or is he talking just diplomatically?
Well, I think what he said is that, and his generals have said the same thing, is that Ukraine has probably exhausted 25% of their offensive potential, that they still have 75% of this potential left. But that potential doesn't mean that Ukraine has a chance of winning, because nowhere in that calculation, for instance, is there an ability of Ukraine to challenge Russia's Air Force. There's no air defense worthy of the name capable of keeping Russian air power out of the forward line of contact. There's no Ukrainian artillery capable of suppressing Russian artillery. There's no Ukrainian electronic warfare capable of jamming Russian communications. And if you can't do that, then you can't even get off the starting blocks in the most sophisticated, dangerous, difficult military operation imaginable. And that is, of course, the breaching operations against a fortified defensive position, which is what Ukraine is trying to achieve right now.
Well, I may be being unkind, but from what I could see, these were not crack troops that the Ukrainians threw into the mall. They were the dispensable. They were the sweepings of the press gang floors. I'll tell you why I say that, both because of their complete failure. You mentioned denting the front line. Many of them never even reached the front line. They were in that gray zone between their line and the Russian line, never got further than that. But also what I detect, a slight uptick in the number of surrendering forces that is going on. I'm seeing more evidence of people surrendering. And when we see them having surrendered, they don't look like crack forces to me. Am I wrong, or did they put some poor bloody infantry and some well-trained, well-armed troops also?
Well, the problem is that Ukraine has, this is the third NATO army that NATO's built. The first NATO army NATO started to construct in 2015 and they had about 260,000 well-trained, well-led, well-equipped troops available when this war started in February of 2022. By June, that army was largely destroyed. A second NATO army was reconstituted, 80,000 strong, and this is the army that participated in the offensive in September and October that enjoyed certain success, but they also were squandered by the Ukrainians, and now we're into the third army. This army has elite units, and those elite units were thrown into battle. But it's elite is a term of relativity. Elite in comparison to what? The rest of the Ukrainian army? Yes, one can say that the 47th Brigade, which was equipped with American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, the 33rd Brigade, which was equipped with German-made Leopard tanks, were the best units in the Ukrainian army. And these are the brigades that led the assault in Zaporizhia. These are the brigades that were destroyed because they're not that good. When we talk about elite Ukrainian forces, we're talking about forces that are poorly trained, poorly led, poorly equipped. You're going to say, Scott, how are they going to be poorly equipped with Leopard and Bradley tanks? They don't know how to use this equipment. They don't know how to employ it tactically. This equipment's too good for their capabilities, so they are poorly equipped. They'd be better off with old Soviet-era equipment that they know how to use, and they're not going to panic. Right now, you have Ukrainian Leopard drivers who are deliberately sabotaging their vehicles so they can't go to the front because they know the second the Leopard shows up on the front, the Russians are going to kill it. The Ukrainian troops you see surrendering are primarily from the territorial brigades. These are lesser quality troops. Many of them have been shanghaied off the streets, as you've said, and when they're put on the front line, they don't want to die. They are unfortunately dying in large numbers, but increasingly you're seeing these men put up their hands and walk toward the Russians in an effort to live, to survive, to ride this war out in a prisoner of war camp instead of being a rotting corpse on the ground in Zaporizhia.
Many months ago, you and I talked about casualty levels on the Ukrainian side, and I think we agreed then that the numbers of dead and wounded were actually beyond Second World War levels. They were heading in the direction of First World War levels of death and wounding. Can you hazard an educated guess at how many men they've now lost?
You know, before the final tally at Bakhmut was put together, I was confident in a calculus that could generate 250 to 300,000 dead. Not because I'm gleeful about it, not because I want it to be so. Just that's the harsh reality of the war that was being fought. Remember, this is a war that General Cavoli, the commander, the Supreme Allied Commander, commander of American forces in Europe, back in January, told a Swedish Defense Forum the scope and scale of the violence is beyond the comprehension, the imagination of NATO. So they can't even imagine a war this violent. And that's how bad it is. And if you can't imagine it, it's hard to comprehend what's happening here. Since we talked, the figures from Bakhmut have come in, and those figures are horrible, horrific. 70,000 dead Ukrainians. Now, some of those dead would have been factored into that original calculation, but I think that we can safely say 330, 340,000 Ukrainian dead. And now we're talking about an additional 10,000 that will be packed on, and that number is going to increase. So by the time this offensive is over, the Ukrainians will have suffered 350, 360,000 dead, inching towards 400,000. And that number will only grow larger as this war goes on because they are incapable of mounting a meaningful pushback against the Russians, who now control the air, control the ground, control artillery, control every aspect of this war. And which means as this conflict goes forward, the Russians are, right now, Putin has said that Russia is carrying out a 10-to-1 casualty advantage. That is, for every one Russian that dies, they're killing 10 Ukrainians. That number is only, that ratio is only going to get higher. By the time this thing is done, the Russians will be taking out 15, 20 Ukrainians for every Russian that's dead.
And of course, as we've discussed before, for every dead Ukrainian soldier, there will be 2, at least, maybe 3, who have been wounded. Do you stand by that ratio?
That's your normal ratio. What I would say with Ukraine, because of the violence that's taking place, they're not evacuating all the wounded that should be evacuated. Many of the dead that we speak of were Ukrainians who, under normal circumstances with well-trained militaries, would have been successfully evacuated and given life-saving medical treatment. One of the reasons why these numbers are so high is that many wounded who could have survived have been abandoned on the battlefield, subsequently died. And that's just a sad reality. So I would say that the number is probably 1-to-1 for Ukrainian dead and wounded, given the fact that they're so bad at evacuating their wounded.
Now, in a very, very telling passage earlier in this conversation, you made the point that this was not a military counteroffensive, it was a political one. Might that be the reason why the head of the armed forces appears to have? Might it be that he was certainly widely reported to have opposed this counteroffensive until he got a long shopping list of more Western weapons. But what he was really saying was, give me more time. Might that be why he has been apparently shuffled off the scene, or worse? And what about the head of intelligence? Where is he? And didn't that picture that appeared in the last day or two insult our intelligence by asking us to believe it was real?
Right now, President Zelensky enjoys a high level of support, according to certain polls in Ukraine. He's a wartime leader with support, but that support is rapidly eroding as the corruption of his government and the incompetence of his government start to be increasingly exposed. One of his principal political opponents, somebody who is positioned to challenge him in the election in 2024, March 2024 is when it's scheduled, is General Zaluzhny, a very popular commander who has been critical all along of many of the decisions, the political decisions made by Zelensky to sacrifice the Ukrainian army in order to impress his NATO masters. Zaluzhny was very much against committing Ukrainian forces to the battle in Bakhmut. He believes that Ukraine would have been better served by preserving the lives of 50 to 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers who could have been put to good effect in a future counteroffensive. He also believed that you can't speak of committing Ukrainian forces to a counteroffensive when you lack the ability to challenge Russian air power, suppress Russian artillery, suppress Russian command and control, and Ukraine can't do any of that. So I think that Zaluzhny has been neutralized politically by being removed from the decision-making. I don't know why that is. There's some speculation that he may have been injured in a strike against the decision-making center. There's other speculation that he has been sent on a vacation or told to go sit in the corner because Zelensky, in the lead up to the NATO summit, doesn't need this kind of challenge for somebody who has the reputation of General Zaluzhny. Now, about the Ukrainian intelligence officer, there's a lot of information that he was wounded by a Russian attack against the headquarters, and that he was evacuated to Germany to receive medical treatment, and that his injuries were life-threatening. Many reports came out that he was dead, and these were credible reports, which brings into question then who did we see in this photo opportunity? Was this him? Was it a body double? Was this a Photoshop? And I think you are right to question all of this because the information that I've been evaluating, again, it's not intelligence information, it's open source information, but it has a certain ring of authenticity to it. And the suggestion is that this gentleman was badly injured and probably dead. So that probably isn't him that we're seeing in the photograph, or if it is, it's a pretty poor Photoshop. But it's imperative that, again, Zelensky's in the business of shaping perception. He's never been somebody who earned his reputation by telling the truth. This is a man who has been lying to his people and to the West from day one, and he's lying now. He's lying even though he knows that Ukraine has no chance whatsoever of achieving any militarily significant objectives or outcomes from this counteroffensive. He's lying, saying that that is a possibility. Therefore, it's worthy of the sacrifice that is being demanded of the Ukrainian army. And he's doing this purely to create a perception that he continues to be a viable leader of Ukraine, worthy of NATO support. So this man is sacrificing the lives of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers just so that he can continue to embezzle tens of billions of dollars from NATO and the United States.
I don't know about you, but if Klitschko was advancing on me in the ring, I wouldn't be looking forward to his first punch. I mean, you could fight him better than I could, but even you wouldn't like to be in the way of a Klitschko right-hander. Do you think what he said today was significant? I was frankly surprised by how critical he was and how darkly he spoke about all the games and all the fighting going on, not at the front, but at the center, in the catacombs of Kiev.
It's clear. First of all, Klitschko is another one of these potential contenders for the throne in March. He is a viable candidate to challenge Zelensky. And so you have to evaluate a lot of what he says from that perspective. Is he trying to generate a political controversy for his own political gain? Or is this an accurate reporting about the sad state of affairs? And I think it's a combination of the two. I think you can report truthfully about the sad state of affairs and seek to benefit from it politically. He understands the level of corruption and incompetence. He understands the cost that has been accrued because of it. And I think he's tired of this, frankly, what speaking is what is the murder of Ukraine's manhood. Because that's what's happening. This is murder. This offensive should never have happened. There's no military professional out there worth his salt who would claim that Ukraine had a chance. This was purely a political exercise, but it's one that's being paid in countless gallons of Ukrainian blood. And I think Klitschko is sick and tired of it. He's a man who understands sacrifice. He understands violence. And he understands when to fight and when not to fight. And I think his voice will become increasingly relevant in Ukrainian politics as Zelensky's star starts to fade. And it's really going to fade after this NATO summit because Zelensky's not going to be able to come out of this looking good. NATO is going to walk away from the summit understanding the reality of their defeat, their demise, the failure of their anti-Russian gambit, and the fact that they're going to have to learn how to live with Russia, which means they have to jettison Zelensky.
It's not all bad news, though, Scott. They are about to benefit from an accounting error in Washington. A mere $6.2 billion should have been sent to them, but wasn't, and presumably now will be. We've grown used to the Pentagon losing not billions, I think arguably over 30 years, trillions of dollars that they cannot account for. But were you shocked at the discovery of $6.2 billion down the back of the sofa?
Well, it's motivated me to go check the couch cushions myself to see what I might find. Maybe I'll be able to buy some ice cream tonight. But it's a cute little accounting trick. It's one that Congress should really look into because what's happening now is more and more people are starting to question the outlay of U.S. taxpayer money, and rather than go back to Congress and say we need an additional $6.5 billion, they have this accounting trick. They basically overpriced the value of the material sent, and so by repricing it, they miraculously generate $6.5 billion that can now be used on other material. The IRS wouldn't let me get away with that on my tax return, and I don't think the U.S. Congress would allow the Biden administration to get away with this in terms of their creative accounting on how U.S. taxpayer dollars are spent in Ukraine.